seat. Kind of different audience. Yes, you weren't here, some of you. Lucky you. Good afternoon. We will convene Senate Subcommittee Number 3, Health and Human Services. Thank you very much for joining us today. For hearing number, I've lost track. Hearing number 5. Who's counting? There are 2 parts for today's hearing. Part A will cover health-related issues. Part B will cover child welfare services. There's no vote-only calendar today, so it'll primarily be informational. We'll hold items open, the vast majority of them, until post may revise. We'll invite the first panel up. First item is 0977, the California Health Facilities Financing Authority. Again, this is informational, page 3 of the agenda. We'll be talking about the investment in the Mental Health Wellness Act of 2013. Ms. Liebert, how do you pronounce the acronym for the agency? CHAFA. Excellent. Thank you very much for coming. We'll ask you to pay particular attention to the questions posed in the agenda as a part of your presentation, please.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to do.
Great, thank you.
So thank you for having us this morning. Since the last time that we were before you, CHAFA has continued a very successful and fast implementation of SB 82. The program landed in CHAFA at the end of June of 2013. We then held a lot of stakeholder meetings, public forums across the state. And by November 21st, we had emergency regulations established, and we opened our first funding round for the program November 22nd. That funding round closed on January 15th or thereabouts, January 22nd. We scored the applications, we entertained appeals, and the board made awards April, a year ago today, for the first funding round in 2014. And just to give you a sense from that first funding round, we had $55 million of the $125 million that had been set aside for crisis residential programs had been encumbered. So we had, roughly 60 million or thereabouts left over after that. Nearly all of the crisis stabilization funding and nearly all of the mobile crisis funding had been committed in that first funding round. That was 15 million for crisis stabilization and 2.5 million for the mobile crisis. And nearly all of the personnel funding, that's the MHSA funding, the 4 million had been also committed during that funding round. So we then held a second funding round, which opened July 14th and it closed September 15th. Applications were scored, awards were made by the CHAFA board December 4th. An additional 10 million of the crisis residential funding had been awarded, and a little bit more, really depleting all of the personnel funding, was awarded during that. Those 2 funding rounds hold the promise of 866 crisis residential and stabilization treatment beds. 717 of those are crisis residential and 149 are crisis stabilization. It holds the promise for 43 vehicles for the mobile crisis teams and about 59 new people hired. The crisis residential and crisis stabilization programs right now, for all of those awards that have been made, are in various states of construction. Some in the beginning, some in the middle, none at the end yet. This is a long process, and we're being very careful with how we administer the money and disperse the funds. We do have 30 vehicles that have been acquired, and 29, roughly, of those 58 people I mentioned that are actually out there on the street delivering services right now. A third funding round was opened January of this year, and it just closed March 30th. So we're poised, and now we're going to score those applications. And if they all score well, so these are assumptions here, but if they all score well, then there will be roughly 51 million remaining for crisis residential programs. So that's about another 10 million that would be committed in this funding round. And that holds the promise for about 80 new beds, additional 80 beds, bringing our count to about 950, and 5 more vehicles, bringing the overall count to 48. If you're interested, I can tell you what counties have been touched with this.
Yes, please.
You want to hear that? Okay. So here are the counties that have been awarded funding. Alameda, Butte, Contra Costa, Fresno, Lake, Los Angeles, Marin, Mendocino, Merced, and if I could just with asterisk that, Merced partnered in a very wonderful collaboration with Madera, Tuolumne, Calaveras, Mariposa in the first funding round. In the second funding round, they were also awarded funds, and they added Stanislaus into that partnership. Monterey, Nevada, Riverside, Sacramento, San Bernardino, San Diego, San Joaquin, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, Santa Clara, Sonoma, Ventura, and Yolo. The counties that applied in the third funding round, we're still scoring those: Kings, Los Angeles again, Mendocino, Sacramento, and San Bernardino.
Did miss a county in all of those.
I'm going to talk to you now, that's just the overview of the program. Why are counties experiencing difficulties? So the first step in the process, once they were awarded grants, is the counties all had to execute grant agreements. They had to sign a contract with us that has remedies and has expectations on our end. And all of those grant agreements had to be approved by their boards of supervisors. And believe it or not, that took a lot of time. In some cases, 6 months to get it on the calendar and get approved. Now, some of those counties are poised and getting their crisis residential programs implemented, crisis stabilization, and as you all likely know, those bring on a host of their own local issues that are unique, that involve their lawyers, our lawyers, RFPs, formal RFP processes. So for example, Los Angeles, they have 35 different programs that they're trying to implement all at once. And they're being extraordinarily careful to make sure that they don't have an appeal in the process of their RFP process to get providers on board, so that they're not experiencing further delays in getting their programs implemented. Mobile crisis programs, we're seeing some turnover in staff. This is a demanding, high-stress job of dealing with folks in crisis, and so there are those issues. Counties also have had some turnover in their executive management, and that always translates into some delays. But we closely monitor them. We have status reports, as you saw in your own committee report there. We closely monitor them, and we just got status reports from all of them in February, so we have a very near understanding of where they are all with all of their projects. Another issue that counties experience is that the statute's really clear that counties can receive the money directly, but also that their nonprofit providers can receive the money directly. We set up the program so that the counties would be the only recipient of the money. We wanted to maximize accountability and our ability to get the money back if there was a problem, but we've since learned that the counties really would benefit in some cases with the providers just getting the money. Direct. It's more efficient and for them. So we've made a programmatic change very recently to accomplish that. So that all of those contribute to delays.
So that programmatic shift will go into effect with this third funding cycle, or when will the communities experience that?
So since our regulations are silent on the issue, the board has the ability, at least according to our legal counsel, to make those changes now.
Got it.
So we're doing parallel tracks. We're going with OAL to get that formally adjusted.
Got it.
As well.
Okay.
So as you know, we have this roughly 60 million right now, maybe 50 with this third funding round that's left for crisis residential funding. And the way that our regulations are set up right now, in January of 2016, the regional allocation that we have in place for all of the monies falls away. And that means that a statewide competition will ensue. So if Modoc County wants to request all of that remaining money, that if it's 50 million that's left, they can do it if they can put together a project that's feasible and sustainable, which is wonderful. But that means that it's also open to the whole rest of the state. And part of our understanding of SB 82 is that there was an intention for broad geographic distribution of these monies. And if you, as you heard from the counties, we're accomplishing that, of the counties that you heard. But the board right now is just considering whether or not it might be worthwhile considering some shift of some of those crisis residential monies into the crisis stabilization pot. We only had 15 million there available, and that was oversubscribed, already encumbered. So there may be some value in doing that, and the board has a meeting today, the CHAFA board has a meeting today, and then at the end of April, and they'll be considering that today and giving staff direction on it. We are already working with the Department of Finance right now to determine if the board thinks that that's a good direction to go, what is the process that we need to do to accomplish that? Can the board just make that decision on their own, or do we need legislation to accomplish that?
Senator Stone, you want to ask your question now or at the end of her presentation?
Just a
Sure.
quickie, if that's okay.
Please proceed.
I really appreciate your presentation. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I really like the fact that you're partnering with nonprofit organizations, but I assume that the allocations are made to the county, and the counties then will distribute money based on an application to a nonprofit, or can the nonprofit directly apply to the state for these monies?
So we've required that the counties have to be part of the process the entire time.
Good.
So a nonprofit can apply, but they have to apply with a county, and the county gets the allocation. But this recent change allows us to, instead of sending the money directly to the county, we can send it right to the provider so that they can proceed to do whatever they need to do to get property ready.
I think that's great. I love that kind of streamlining. And then I just wanted to commend you also. You mentioned the distribution of the monies, and it sounds like small counties and large counties alike have been receiving funding. And just one final question, and I'll let you continue. For the crisis residential treatment beds versus the crisis stabilization, you've talked about the new idea of there may be more of a need for crisis stabilization money than crisis residential. Are you saying that the demand for crisis stabilization has far exceeded that for crisis residential, and that's why you're considering making this recommendation that based on the, I don't want to call it the marketplace, but we seem to be hopefully satisfying the crisis treatment beds, but it's the stabilization ones that need the higher priority at this time based on where we are in the program?
I'm not speaking from any place of authority on this. There are members in your audience that can comment more succinctly and precisely about the need. But from our perspective, we had more applications to draw down that smaller amount, the 15 million that was available for crisis stabilization. We had less money than we would have liked to have been able to satisfy all those applications. It's our understanding that it takes a longer amount of time to do crisis residential, to get them up and running, than it does crisis stabilization. And so in trying to speed the delivery and disbursement of money out into communities to get programs up and running, it has only been the thought of the board that they would entertain that consideration of reallocating monies to maximize the speed at which we're getting money out to get the programs running for people that need them.
So taking care of the acute needs that we can do like expeditiously, we have a chronic need that we need to satisfy, and that's going to take time.
Right.
Thank you.
So, but your questioning kind of gets me to the next point here, which is a good one, is that January date that I mentioned, the 2016 date, is a statewide competition date. And it could be that when that happens, a few select counties might move forward and get all of those remaining monies committed and encumbered. The last date for us to encumber monies is June of 2016. So we're just thinking of creative ways before that statewide competition date happens of, giving further expression to SB 82 by trying to accomplish a broader geographic distribution. It may be that some smaller counties might benefit from having that statewide competition postponed a little bit so that they can work with other counties together to draw down money. Another idea that the board's going to be talking about today is in our regulations, not only is there a regional allocation of the monies right now, but counties have maximums that they can apply for based on their population size. If you're a really small county and your maximum amount that you can apply for is $500,000, that doesn't get you very far down the road of establishing a program unless you collaborate with other counties. But then even then, you have to demonstrate that your program is going to be sustainable over time. So one of the ideas that my staff member that's sitting to my right here, Carolyn Abu-Bashara, had was maybe we lift that maximum right now with a regulatory change so that a MODOC that might be limited to $500,000 could apply for $3 million if that's what's remaining in their region, and really consider whether they can make a sustainable program in partnership with other counties. And so these are just ideas that have been brought before us to think about how we might look a little bit more closely and help some of the smaller counties apply. But even if those don't happen, those changes don't happen to the program, the statewide competition will happen in January, and we're pretty confident that the rest of that money will be encumbered, because there is a great need, from what we've been able to observe from this place of running the program, a much greater need than the amount of funding that we've been given for crisis residential programs. We have more need for more money than we have been given.
Yeah.
So let's see if I have anything else to tell you. So the timeline for that is immediate. We're looking at these programmatic adjustments right away. If we need a legislative adjustment to reallocate some of our monies, that's going to take a little bit of time. If the board can decide that now, that could take effect immediately and be in place for our fourth funding round. We don't know the date of the fourth funding round yet, but it will likely be set within the next month or so for us.
Okay. Any questions? Senator Monning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Liebert, for the presentation. And following up on my colleague, Senator Stone, you mentioned that even if it's a nonprofit that applies for the funding, they do it with the county.
Yes.
Does the county retain any portion of the grant if they're participating with the nonprofit, or does it all go to the project of the nonprofit provider?
So in every case of all those counties that I read out that have received funding, all of the counties are receiving the money directly themselves, and they're administering it. In one case so far, we have one county last month, Sacramento, that sought approval to allow the money to go straight to their nonprofit provider to acquire the parcel. I believe in their case that there is some money that has been awarded for equipment. And in that case, Sacramento would be receiving that money directly and handling the acquisition of the equipment directly. But they are part of our grant agreement, so they're part of the contract with us, and we still continue to hold them accountable.
So they're involved in the management of the funding. My question, though, do they retain some of that funding for their own county administrative costs, or are they just a pass-through to the nonprofit?
Well, they're a pass-through in the sense that it goes straight to the nonprofit to develop the program, but none of our funding is for their overhead costs.
That's my question.
We have a 3-month window where we can give startup, working capital costs for just 3 months of operation, but it's the operation of the program. It's not for the county operation.
Thank you.
That's surprising. Finance.
Carla Castillo, the Department of Finance. We would like to continue working with CHAFA and the legislature on these options and to determine if there is statutory change or which of these options is the best use of the remaining funds.
LAO. Senator Stone.
Thank you. I've sat through a number of these hearings so far, and I have to say that I'm very impressed with your proactive distribution of these monies for this very important need in the state of California. As a county supervisor, believe me, I understand the need for crisis treatment beds and all the 5150s that we see and nowhere to place these people that desperately need services. So I want to just commend you and your staff for working with all the counties and being patient with them and getting it to the boards of supervisors to get things done. Because I know fellow boards of supervisors, they want to get these problems addressed as well. And unfortunately, with government, it takes a little bit of time. And I think that you're on track. I think the goal was to have at least 2,000 crisis beds statewide, which is a good goal. Unfortunately, it probably doesn't satisfy the need, but at least we're attacking the problem. And you have basically 866 beds that have been funded. Do we know how many beds that we have been funding are actually online today?
None are online yet.
None are online. Okay.
None are, they're still in their construction and acquiring properties and getting them ready.
When do you think you'll get your first reports letting us know that we're successfully satisfying the need?
The need for that.
That the beds have come to fruition?
Oh, it could take, 6 months to a year, I would say, before we can really tell you how many beds are online, and then start reporting to you on outcomes.
Is there anything in the grant applications that requires the counties and/or nonprofits that they have a certain amount of time to spend that money and get those beds up and running?
Yes, yes.